Hello, welcome to our week 3 feedback video, and I have with me Dr. Nicola Thomas to talk about the topic of gender and sexuality. Now, Nicola, it's been an extremely interesting week, I think, in the course because in a sense the nature of the controversy that we've been engaging in has changed, because in previous weeks when we've been talking about sort of money, violence, race and religion, people have certainly disagreed with some of what we've said, and they've disagreed with our emphases, but no one's really said that these things are not relevant. However, with gender and sexuality, it's been somewhat different, because although many people have certainly liked what we've done, others have been genuinely confused about why we're talking about this, and others simply don't agree that this is really relevant to the topic of empire. So, very broad question, why talk about gender and empire at all?
Well, in a funny way, gender is so taken for granted still. People are female, they're male, they may be trans, but we kind of don't question the way in which our identities are created over time. And so gender is one of these things we still treat as a norm, something that isn't socially constructed or shaped by our social relations with each other. So one of the reasons why we might challenge the reason why gender's in the course is simply because we still don't take it seriously enough as something which we can change and shape as in our society. And in many ways, colonialism was one of the big forces which did normalise our gender relations. Men travelled, men joined the army, men went to India or to the Caribbean. They were the empire builders. And a lot of the work of gender historians is saying, well, stop there. Actually, there were gendered experiences of empire, and gender has made a difference, right, and we should take that seriously.
Right, good, because I mean that sort of leads to the next question, which I think quite a few people raised, which is to say, yes, we accept kind of gender is generically important, but it's kind of been important at all times. The patriarchy has always been there, kind of across time and space. Not very much has changed. So I suppose that a very crucial question is what is specifically imperial about gender? And I mean, you're suggesting, I think, that actually the experience of colonialism and the experience of empire building did in fact was a fundamental shift in the way that gender was discussed and constructed, if we're going to use that term.
And there are lots of different dimensions here. So women, for example, started judging themselves against other women, whether those were colonised women or women of different classes. They saw women move in different ways, and all of those things fed into issues around women's emancipation, women's increased roles in the imperial project meant that people saw there were opportunities for women, and actually that sort of helped shape the way in which the shift in votes for women in Britain ensued. So colonialism and the opportunities for women in colonialism had kind of dramatic effects on how women's roles in society were shaped internationally, not just within those colonial contexts. So there are lots of dynamics going on there, but colonialism was also something which women had to navigate in particular ways because of the relationships between women of different class and colour, of different colonial position, and it was a challenging negotiation. It wasn't something which was an innocent negotiation either. There were power relations to work through.
Now, sort of leading on from that question of power relations, and indeed some of the terminology that we used within the course, some people found some of the language that we were using a bit confusing, perhaps a bit too sort of esoteric, and the things which were particularly raised by participants as being problematic was this idea of intersectional identities and also the idea of embodied being. So I just wonder if you could help clarify some of those points.
Yes, and intersectional identities are a bit like this why does gender matter question, because if we accept the fact that our identities shift and change over time, and as we age or as we develop more understanding of our sexuality, this shapes how we position ourselves in relationship to other people, and it also affects how other people relate to us. And sometimes our gender may be of prime importance in certain situations, but in the colonial context, for a woman travelling, for example, or joining her family in India, her gender might be important in some contexts, but then suddenly her whiteness might become more important in others. So intersectionality kind of gives us this way of talking about how in certain contexts certain parts of our identity might come to the fore and be more important than others.
And embodied beings?
Well, we all are embodied with our emotions, our way in which our bodies perform in the world, our sicknesses, our just the different ways in which we perform our identity through our bodies, which is why the dress debate came in.
Yes.
And so thinking about our bodies as complex, messy, emotional, fluid things helps us also get into human dimensions of our relationships.
Right, I'm glad you mentioned the dress, because again this was something that did cause a certain amount of controversy. Really, Mary Curzon's dress, what's its significance? Why talk about it in a course about empire?
Yeah, and dress is one of those very frivolous things, isn't it? We don't take it seriously because it's just, we throw our clothes on every day and we get on with it. But dress has always been a very powerful signifier of position in society. And the reason to look at Mary Curzon, but it could have been any other person, but the reason to look at her dress is because she was very visibly using her dress to secure her position in society. She was a very anxious about being an American woman in this British Raj context, and she also knew that she knew that people realised she was very wealthy. She had a certain public persona, and she needed to present herself as that person, and she did. And she also knew that she was representing the Raj, and George Curzon and her were great ceremonial kind of all the pomp and circumstances of the Raj came out through their viceregal rule, and she had that peacock dress to kind of perform that. But there were other things going on with dress which perhaps link into this idea around sexuality and gender as well. When she became pregnant, she was very sick for a time, but when she came back into the public domain, George wrote her a letter and said, I hope you've got a decent frock with weaker arrangements in front. And she wrote back to him and said, well, I've got this amazing dress which I've had made of Benares silk. And there's a piece of cloth in the Bath Museum of Costume which is a sari effectively being remodelled to look like a Western dress. And we think that that's her dress which she wore on that occasion because the description links up. So that's a massive question there. We've got a Viceroy of India wearing a modified sari when she's pregnant at her most vulnerable because her husband has said she's got to look decent.
Very interesting. Now a final question, which is about the discipline of geography and the discipline of history. So you're actually in the geography department, most of the rest of us running the course are in the history department. I guess my question is, are you a sort of historian who accidentally wandered off into the geography department, or is there a different way in which geographers look at the kind of problems that we've been talking about that's distinct from the way that historians do it?
Yeah. And I guess colonialism and the kind of way in which geographers interrogate colonialism is a lot about the relationships geographically that people have. So we're very interested in networks and where people move and travel and the relationships they have over space. So that every relationship has a geography, it happens somewhere, and for geographers, those somewheres matter. And we believe that the tools we have as geographers to think about what we would call spatial relations are distinctive to the tools that historians use. But geography had to interrogate its colonial history because the Royal Geographical Society and the geographers of the 19th century were the people who were mapping the colonial conquest. So geography had lots of skeletons in its disciplinary cupboard to unfold, and feminist geographers said, well, actually women were producing geographical knowledge and we should take their scientific knowledge seriously, which is why I got interested in colonial history, because I was interested in the sort of geographies that women were undertaking in the colonial context.
Thank you very much. And now that's all that we've got time for this week, but we look forward to seeing you again next week when we'll be talking about the theme of propaganda.